welcome to the Fundamentals of Lute Playing. My name is Laudon Schuett, and today we're going to talk about speed. Now, I've held off on this topic for a while for two primary reasons. The first is from a pedagogical perspective, I don't want students to be super worried about speed in the very beginning. I'd rather they focus on just getting a good sound, on being in time, those sort of things. And then the second reason is I don't think of myself as a speed guy. I like to joke that I'm like the slowest professional lute player, and I tend to enjoy things at more moderate tempos. And that's just a personality thing, and it sort of has made me think, oh, I'm just not a fast player, so I shouldn't tell other people how to be fast players. I'm a big fan of teach what you can actually do. Now, that said, because speed is not something that perhaps came to me naturally or is something that I emphasize a lot, I've had to think about it a lot because I do think that speed can be very, very important. I think it frees you to play. This sounds very obvious, but to play the tempos of the pieces that you hear in your mind. The reason to be able to play quickly is to be able to reproduce how you envision a piece. And when we're talking about Renaissance music, in particular Renaissance lute playing, there are a lot of 16th note runs. And those 16th note runs often go on and on and on. It requires a fair amount of endurance. So not only are you talking about speed, but you're talking about endurance and comfort. And so let's chat about when is it an appropriate time to start worrying about speed. I think that if you're an intermediate level player and you've been playing for a year and a half, or something like that, then I think you have enough perspective to start examining your technique and working out how to get that speed. Now, if you're coming from another instrument like classical guitar, or you're an experienced musician on another instrument, you may get to that point faster. You may be a couple of months or something like that, or even earlier. You may want to start working on it immediately. Let's say you're a really advanced classical guitar player or something like that, and you just want to get speed out of the way. That's absolutely fine. So when we approach speed, there's a couple things to keep in mind that I think I've learned about speed over the years is that one, it's relative. Keep that in mind. Most human beings aren't walking around with a metronome in their head. And I'm also going to remind people that they didn't have metronomes in the 16th and early 17th century, right? We're really talking the 19th century. And the early metronome use is really just to set the tempo at the beginning of a piece. Now, they did practice with clocks, like the second hand on a clock, and they did practice with pendulums. We have some evidence of that, at least in the 17th century, which could probably work back to the 16th century. They were likely using pendulums. And I think the thing to keep in mind about that is it means that they were probably not going like, okay, I'm going to play this little segment at 78 BPM, and then now I'm going to play that little segment at 79 BPM and 80 BPM. The approach was probably looser. The other thing about speed is affected by the space you are in. So if you're in a really resonant hall, you may want to play more slowly. If you are in a dry space, you may want to play more quickly. And I'll see even very advanced players going, okay, I need, they're checking their metronomes before they go out on stage to make sure they have the tempo right. And it's funny, like you have to listen to the space that you're in. Now, the exception to that, and I've had this pop up for me in professional settings, is that if you're playing with an ensemble and they have a certain tempo that they like taking that piece at or doing that piece at, and you just know you're going to have to play that at that tempo, I will pull the metronome out and I will just make sure I can do it at their tempo. That's just sort of a practical thing. So I'm anti-metronome until it's really stupid to not be anti-metronome. I'm like, pull it out, you fool, and make sure you're ready to go. So let's talk about how to improve your speed and some tips that you may find helpful. In some of my earlier videos, I mentioned the fact that students often struggle experimenting with different techniques. I see students over and over and over again being stuck in the same sitting position, using the same right hand technique. I'll say, hey, try out this position. They'll try it for 2 minutes, and then they're like, oh no, this doesn't feel right, and they go right back to their old position. This, to me, if you take anything away from this video, this is the major problem. I honestly believe, and this obviously goes outside of speed as well. This goes into other topics, but what you need to do is get comfortable with the idea of experimentation. And of course, when we experiment, you may try something else, and it feels weird. And we need to be able to distinguish between, well, it feels weird and it feels different and it feels bad. So for example, if you're the kind of person that sits with the lute like this, and you've got it over like this, you know, this is how you've always played, and your teacher, or you need to experiment with a different position, let's say you're doing something like this, I would give it a couple days. I would spend a couple of days and really just recognize that, oh, this feels a little funny. Or let's say you're using footstools. You know, you grab a footstool and you go, oh, I don't really like the footstool, or I don't really like the cross-legged, or I don't like the strap. Spend 2 or 3 days with each of the positions. But with speed, what you're looking for, in general, is a sitting position that keeps the instrument relatively stable. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't go on YouTube and find some video of a lute player going like this and they're playing very fast. People work around things. Professionals kind of find what works for them. But if you are struggling with speed, one thing that will really, really help is having a very stable sitting position. So whether it's something like this with the leg crossed, you could cross the other leg, do something like this. I find this to be a little looser for me. I like to have the lute in the bowl. My 2 favorite positions when I don't have too much of a belly, because the belly does make a difference. When I don't have too much of a belly, my favorite positions are with usually 2 footstools, one a little higher on the left leg and one a little lower on the right, or I like this cross-legged position. This cross-legged position is probably my favorite. I think I've said in previous videos. I just don't always do it because my leg goes numb, and I keep looking for ways to like avoid that happening, because I love this position. I feel like I've got the lute cradled here. Now, the next thing, once you've got a position where you feel like you've really got control of the instrument, the next thing I would work on is finding the right hand position that affords you the most speed and comfort. So what does that mean? Sometimes we can achieve a very high speed, but it's tense, or it can't be maintained, right? And what I would do is I'd just be very systematic about this. So I'll give you an example. We'll talk about 4 different right hand positions today. You'll have a thumb under position with no ring finger resting, just with the pinky resting. And keep in mind, this is all going to be in this sitting position. You could be in a different sitting position trying out these 4 different right hand positions. So thumb under with pinky resting. Thumb under with pinky and ring finger resting. Thumb out with pinky resting. And then thumb out with pinky and a finger resting. Now, if all of this sounds like voodoo to you, like I don't know what he's talking about, I cover all of these in previous videos, so you may want to go back, and I've got a whole video on ring finger planting. I've got several right hand videos. So those would be good to watch if you don't know what I'm talking about in this segment. So what I would do is I would then take each of these positions and try playing some sort of tremolo, just some kind of that sort of thing, right? And I'll try that with thumb out, with a ring finger planted. Try it without the ring finger planted. Try it with thumb under with ring finger. try it without the ring finger, like I did at the beginning. You're comparing all of these. And I think at this stage, I'm not super worried about the actual tempo. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I'm more worried about how does it feel. You know, just am I getting tense in my shoulder? Am I getting tense in my arm? Could I, for example, just do this all day long? Just go blah, 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 blah. When I'm just sitting here, I could grab my coffee. You know, that sort of thing. Keeping it very, very relaxed. And then I think what I would do next is, and this is funny because I'm not a big fan of the metronome, but when I'm doing this sort of testing and experimenting, it's nice to have something sort of a way to measure things. So I don't own a metronome. I just bring it up on my iPad. Let's see. So this is at 126. Just figure that's a nice fast speed. And what I'm going to do is, you could do it with the open string. You could just do an open string thing. I think it's nice to introduce the left hand a little bit and just see how they work together. So what I would do is I would take like a 5-note segment, something that feels really good, like, let's see. And I'm just going to blast that off. And then I'm going to try that using the different hand positions. Okay, and then thumb under. Let's do it again. This is with A resting. And I think, you'll find that with those small segments, they might all work, right? And I think the funny thing is, after you start working on speed, you can get it to work with different hand positions. I can get kind of fairly close with my thumb out and my thumb under, so that they sound. I've done videos using both. I'll pause this for a second. Using both, and some people don't even notice whether I've changed thumb out or thumb under or something like that. But you may find that one of those hand positions already works way better. And again, we're looking for the speed and we're looking for the comfort. We don't want it to be this, you barely get through it, but we want it to just be this sort of relaxed, just kind of going along. And bear in mind, I set this to 126 because that's kind of pushing my limits. Your limits may be way lower. You may be at 98. You may be at 88 or something like that. But what I'll generally do is I'll pick something that's just above my comfort zone. And so I practice it with 5 notes, and then what I'll do after that is, I think it's 9. I'm going to do math. I'm a musician having to do math here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So essentially 1 E and 2 E and 3. So that way we have this, that sort of a thing. And then I'm going to do the same test. I'm just going to go through these different hand positions and with this little segment here. Okay, so that was thumb out with A. We'll do thumb out with no A. Okay, and then we'll do thumb under with A. Okay, and then we'll do thumb under with no A. And I think that's starting to feel uncomfortable. So for me, in this sitting position, using thumb under with no A, starting to feel tension in my arm and that sort of thing. Okay, great. So what that means is what I've got left now is thumb out with A, thumb out with no A, and then thumb under with A. So I've now eliminated one thing. Now, keep in mind, we're not talking about tone. We're not talking about other musical elements here. Our goal today is just, hey, let's figure out what is the fastest thing for us. So then what I'll do is, I don't know, let's speed it up a little bit. I'll go to 131, and we'll do the 5-note segment first. Okay, that's fine. Cool. And you know, I don't play to a metronome regularly, so if I get a little off, I'm sorry. It's just not something that I think works well with Renaissance music. It works great with other, you know, whenever I've done classical guitar and I had to do modern pieces, or, you know, I have friends who are metal players and things like that. I think it's really important to be that precise. But for Renaissance music, I do like the idea of there being a little bit of looseness. So here's thumb under with A resting. Okay, so all of those work with 5 notes, so let's try it with this. Cool, that's fine. Okay, let's do it without A. Cool. Feel like that's a little more work. We'll see. And then thumb under with A. Not too bad. Let's crank it up some more. I don't know. 139. Okay. So same thing here. So we're getting up, just pushing and seeing what happens on the edges of what's possible. This is still comfortable. Okay, let's do it without the A. Starting to get a little tense there. Okay, let's try it with the 9 notes. Cool, without the A. Feel like that one's starting to break down just a little bit. We'll see. Sometimes I have to listen back to the recording to find out. That's definitely taking more work. So now we're getting into, for me, at least talking about speed. Thumb out, some variant of thumb out is probably going to be the fastest. So let's go to 147. So I'm at 147. You know, take breaks. I think that's an important thing. And again, we're not looking to master anything right now. We're just we're doing these little chunks, and we're just seeing, okay, what is going to be the tool that we're going to end up using to work on our speed. So let's do this. And you'll see I'm kind of assessing how is my body feeling. Okay, and then no A. Okay, let's do the 9 notes. So at this point, you know, we're getting into late 140s. You know, the next thing would be pump it up to 150. And what I'm finding is, you know, that's a fair amount of speed. Like you know, for me, I don't need a whole lot more than that. So at this stage, what I probably would do is I would turn the metronome off and sit in front of the microphone a bit and take my time with this same segment. And play it a number of times. Just sort of, and then do it without the A. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to listen back and I'm going to see, okay, which one sounds better? Which one do I like better, in that context? And then once you've got that worked out, you go, okay. And it may not be the faster one. I think that's the interesting thing. You may find as you're doing this that you'll have two possibilities with your right hand technique. Let's say it's thumb under and thumb under with A resting, or it's thumb out and thumb out with A resting. And they're kind of, one of them might be faster. So let's say, for example, that my thumb out with A resting is faster. I can get a faster sort of speed with that, but I like the sound of no A resting. Then really the consideration becomes tone and the sort of the attack, the sound that you're going to get, and then tension. And then you pick. I mean, and that kind of becomes the foundation of your playing, right? And so you've now decided, okay, I've got my sitting position. I've got my right hand position. I've done all of this testing. What do I do? What do I do next? And what other things can help me to play fast? So a couple of things that may help you in the testing process, and once you've worked out which right hand position you want to use. Minimal movement. If you're doing big movements like this, it's really hard to get this to go fast. Now, for some people, the angle of the arm, one thing to be aware of is you can have these very small movements with the thumb and the index finger. Not so much with me. I find that my arm doesn't do as much, but I've seen it with other players. And their arm can move a lot, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. The small amount of movement is actually going to be at the fingertips, not allowing the distance. So when I pluck and then I come back, I keep things very close. So however much the arm is moving or the wrist is moving or the hand is moving, I'm keeping the fingers pretty darn close to that string so that I'm minimizing the distance. So you pluck and you return, you pluck and you return, and I'm finding that pocket. That sort of pocket of comfort as I go. And you, depending on where your arm is on the instrument, you may see more arm movement like this. You may see very little, maybe pretty minimal. Also, the amount of movement may depend on whether you're using an additional anchor or not. It kind of doesn't matter. That's sort of, you just have to work out what's gonna work for you. And I think starting with these very, very simple things. I wouldn't test your speed with like a full piece of music. I wouldn't go, oh, well, this technique is faster with this like full piece of music, and I can do this or that. Literally start with a little segment. And then what you are going to need to work out is, well, how do I change strings, right? What is the trick for changing speed, changing strings, and how am I going to stay really close to the strings and work that out? If I had to boil everything down, because I have struggled with speed for a long time, and I think it's still not necessarily my what I'm known for or what I'm good at. But what I will say has made the biggest difference, the things that have made the biggest difference for me in terms of speed is the fundamental technique. So finding a sitting position that's very supportive, and then finding a right hand position that just feels good, like it really can move, and that means experimenting. That has probably done about 70% of the work, if not 80% of the work. And then the next element, I think, is acclimation. And that just means, like, if you're somebody who's used to playing slowly, if you're sitting there and for 30 years you've been playing the lute, and you've played maybe a run, like you've done something like, oh, that's your speed, then suddenly going to something like that, doing something way faster suddenly is gonna freak you out. So what I would do is I would take your piece of music that you're playing, and I'd break it into chunks. So, let's say you have, there's a piece I wrote for my wife, which has this ending where it's kind of, it does this fast thing. I think I've got it. I recorded it a while ago, but haven't played it since. That there's some scary things in there, right? So what I would do is break it down into little chunks and just work on this. Relax. And this could be done with the metronome. I told you I don't really like the metronome, but you could totally do it with the metronome. And then you add that little bit. And you notice I'm keeping everything as efficient as possible, or as best I can. And you might work on this. Those descending runs have always been a challenge for me. You work on that, you make a little exercise of it. I'm doing this very quickly, but I could see a scenario where an entire practice session is just working on that. I'm not generally a fan of practicing something really slowly and then incrementally speeding it up. Again, I guess it's not such a big deal if you've really got the technique and it's going to work at a faster speed. If you're going to do that, at the very least, what I would do is try to play it fast a couple times and make sure that you're like, okay, this will work when I get there. And all I'm doing is I'm playing slowly. What I would rather do instead is take, break down the segment, and what are the movements, and then test it at speed. And I'll say this because I know from experience, because I am a habitual rusher, that if you can be precise in your timing, it actually sounds faster. If you rush, it actually makes you sound slower, which is kind of funny. But if you're very precise, 1 E and a 2, and 1 E and a 2, and 1 E and a 2, and you're very, very precise with your timing, it actually makes you sound faster. So taking your music, breaking it into these chunks, and then putting the chunks together. Like I said, you could take a segment where, you spend a session working on this, and you take another session and you go, right? That's tricky, that descending run. And whether you're using A or not A or whatever, it doesn't matter. But at this point, you figured out what technique you're going to use. And then you add them together. And you pull it together. I prefer that. And if you find that the segment is too big and you just can't do it, then you spend some more time, you make the segment a little smaller, and you just get that down. Take breaks between each, relax, make sure your shoulders are good. I always, I've got terrible allergies, and the thing I always have to work on is not holding my breath or doing something weird with my breathing. And then you slowly build, and you can chain or chunk your way through it, but instead of playing it super slow all the time, I would either play it without time, sort of working out the mechanics, and that'll be really important here, right, when you do this. And then immediately, once you think you've got it worked out, test out what you just worked out mechanically. Now, the other thing that can be really helpful is isolating the hands, particularly the right hand. So I'll take a passage, and I will make sure this can be done with the metronome or without. And you can do the left hand. It's harder because you kind of feel the urge to add an extra little twist, but at least separating the right hand. And then you put the left hand in. And then do this. Let's see if I can push it a little faster so that you can see what it's like on the edge. Almost like I'd have to work on that to get it even up a little faster there. So that's what I would do. So to review, if you're at a stage in your playing when you want to improve your speed, step one, work out your fundamental technique, sitting position, right hand position, and make sure you test those. And you test those by taking a small segment of material, something like I showed you before, and pull out the metronome and see which technique, which sitting position. You can have a little chart on the wall and tally, well, this one's better than this one and that one's better than that one, and you narrow it down. And remember, our focus right now is just speed. You may decide that a different position or a different thing overall is better, even if it's not fast. But it's fun to do this experiment. You go through, it might take you a couple weeks, you test. Starting, do a 5-note segment and then do a 9-note segment. And then one of the other things you can do is also test endurance. So for example, if I've got a segment, obviously I can repeat this. You could just do it over and over again. I like and that's sort of just testing which right hand has the most endurance, right? Because sometimes in Renaissance music, you get a whole page of 16th notes. And so you may need to also do an experiment where you go, okay, I know which one's faster, but which one feels better for long periods of time. So endurance will be another thing to have in there. You work that out, you pick your technique, and then what I would do is chunk or chain. Pick one piece of music where your goal is to go beyond your comfort zone. You can use a metronome or you can refer to the metronome. If you're like me, you don't like using the metronome, what you do is you work really, really hard on your passage, right? Let's say I've been sitting there, and let's take my little thing here at the end, and you've worked on it for an hour. Okay, now it's time to see, okay, can I play this? I don't know, I'm not going to play it at 142. It'll sound ridiculous. So let's just say like 108. Okay, I just want to see, let's say my goal is 108 or somewhere around there. I just want to see. Then I know, hey, I'm on the right track, okay? And then what you could do is, let's say your goal, you can use the metronome as a reference, right? And let's say your goal is to get that piece up to, I don't know, okay, we'll do something ridiculous. 125. It's not 125, but let's just say it is. And I go, 2, 3. Yeah, it ends up getting a little ridiculous at that tempo. And then what you do, you go, it's working. Turn it off, right? Or you test it on a different segment, right? You test it on a different spot, and you call it a day. And you go, okay, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on it. And then you pull the metronome out, and you're just using it as a reference. If you do like using the metronome, then what I would do is make sure you spend time with the darn thing turned off and that you are listening to your playing. One of the things I hate the most about the metronome is that clicking covers the sound that you're making. I'm a big tone guy, so if I'm listening to the notes, I'm like, okay, what's the sound? What am I getting out of this? And so if you really like the metronome, which is absolutely fine, really, honestly, at the end of the day, it's results, right? Not how you get there. If you like the metronome, just make sure you spend some time without it so that one, you're used to playing without that sort of security blanket going, and then two, so you can hear yourself. And whether you use the metronome or not, record yourself, listen back. I'm going to listen back to this recording and I'm going, oh, I'm curious to see what sounds better or what doesn't. And that's exactly what your approach is going to be. And you're going to figure out, you're going to experiment and work out how to do this. Now, specific nitty gritty mechanic things. The unfortunate thing is that really that's best done with like a private lesson in person. I could sit here and I could say, well, the angle of this finger needs to be like this, and you come in on this, and it's different for everybody. It looks a little different for everybody. So I think if I were to just say, like, my hand does this, or if I were to give you a zoom in on my hand, it might actually be detrimental. I've thought about making some addendum videos where I do have those zoom ins on the hand, and I might do it, and we'll see how it works. But my suspicion from teaching for 20 some years now is that it may actually not be a great thing. Just because everybody's so different. This may be kind of the edge of what is possible on a YouTube video. You may need to get a private lesson and have somebody really look at your hands as you're playing and go, oh, you're doing this little thing that's a little funny, or there's this little problem there. So keep that in mind, and I do think that's best done with an in-person consultation. It's just some things are way easier that way. I love the internet. I love being able to teach and reach lots of people, but there is sort of a limit there. I hope that you find some things helpful in this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you're enjoying the series, the best thing you can do to support it is to subscribe. I've also put my Patreon in the description. If you have your own little tricks for achieving speed, throw them in the comments. Help other people out. This is an area where I feel like everybody kind of finds their own path to the top of the mountain. Have a wonderful week and happy looting. Bye-bye.